Welcome to this third in our series of Moravian ideals, Moravian music. Our first two sessions talked about the ideal of a heart religion of devotion to the Savior and simplicity and stillness. Today we're talking about community and fellowship. Given the fact that the official name of the Moravian Church is Unitas Fratrum, it should come as no surprise that the ideals of community and fellowship have received a great deal of attention and emphasis. Even given the personal importance and influence of Zinzendorf in the 18th century church, the emphasis inherited from the ancient unity on shared leadership has continued. Christ is indeed the chief elder, but there is no earthly pope or monarchical bishop. Instead, practical leadership in the congregations and in the unity as a whole is exercised through a series of interlocking boards which work and speak in the collective. We have often said that if there are 6 Moravians together, they will immediately organize themselves into 7 committees with overlapping jurisdictions. At stated intervals, unity and provincial synods gather to enact legislation for the wider community, but again, this is a group process. In between these synods, the smaller body empowered to make necessary decisions is rightly titled the Provincial Elders' Conference.
Communal leadership leads naturally to an emphasis on the church as a fellowship, as a spiritual family. It is not only because of the Moravian Church's small size that Moravians throughout the world are conscious of being part of an extended family. This was even more so in earlier years when many Moravians lived in the settlement congregations, in which the privilege of living in the town was reserved only for Moravians. In these communities, the numerous worship and devotional services, along with frequent meetings of the choirs, assured a close spiritual connection among the members. The regulation of trades and all other aspects of life, coupled with the physical nearness to one another, ensured that the Moravian communities were close-knit indeed. This focus on life lived in community echoes the sentiments of Luke of Prague 200 years before Zinzendorf. Luke himself stated that the life of faith cannot be lived in solitude. The communion of saints shakes a person loose from personal isolationism. A logical consequence of this emphasis on being part of such a close-knit community is reluctance to allow any one person to stand out too much. Showing off in any fashion was to be avoided, and this applied to music as much as to any other part of life. This may be why there is a decided lack of solo music for organ in Moravian collections. A short prelude was generally used before a worship service. However, this was generally to be simple and based upon a known hymn tune. Displays of virtuosity would have been horrifying.
And this too explains the disappearance of the interludes between phrases of chorales. The story goes like this. By the third quarter of the 18th century, it became the practice for the organist to play brief interludes between the lines of hymns. This was to give the congregation time to ponder what they had just sung or to think ahead to what they were going to sing. You can imagine, however, the potential for trouble here. These interludes were generally improvised, based upon a few formulas, and improvisation depends all too heavily upon that indefinable characteristic, good taste. As Christian Gregor put it in the preface to his 1784 chorale book, everything that sounds strange in the singing of the congregation disturbs not only its agreeable concord, but also the peaceful devotion of the heart. This is especially noticeable in the interludes between the lines of the hymn. If these are merely artistic or quite thoughtless and improper, or if they depart from their real purpose of being simple, agreeable, and proper guides for transition from what precedes to what follows, then they disturb the close connection of the one to the other. Christian Latrobe, who lived from 1758 to 1836, writing in a letter to his daughter, went even further in recognizing the perils of this practice. In recalling his time as a student at the seminary in Barbie in the late 1770s, he commented that he was fond of playing the organ in worship. He goes on to say, and this is an extended quote, "But our taste at that time was bad. The noble simplicity of our church music and hymn tunes was lost in flourishes and ill-placed decorations and deformed by long, straggling interludes. Frequent complaints were made by the worthy and venerable fathers of the church who felt themselves disturbed by the thoughtless and tasteless manner of playing the organ. But these were not heeded, being rather considered as a proof that the complainants wanted skill to appreciate the value of the artful and ornamental musical drapery with which we clothed tunes, otherwise, in our opinion, too dull and monotonous. No one felt more keenly and more justly the absurdity and hurtfulness of our manner than that excellent man, the late Bishop Spangenberg. After much gentle and fruitless remonstrances, he at length hit upon an expedient which, at least in a degree, answered his purpose, and for which I feel grateful at this moment. I was only one of 8 students, if I remember right, who took their turn by weeks to play the organ at chapel. And once on a communion day, he sent for me after dinner to the castle. I was not a little alarmed on receiving the message, feeling that some complaint might have been lodged against me, which might subject me either to a reprimand from the venerable bishop or even to suspension or exclusion from communion. I therefore entered his apartment with fear and trembling, but was soon relieved by the kind and affectionate manner in which I was addressed. My mind was prepared to receive with humility whatever he might propose, and his words were to the following effect.
For this long time past, I have been filled with concern and even pain when I reflected how the most beautiful part of our worship is rendered unpleasant to me and others by the manner of my brethren in playing the organ. They seem not to have duly considered the importance of that species of service, especially in a living Church of Christ. I will not charge you or them with levity or indifference, for I conceive the fault to originate more in thoughtlessness than in a total disregard to the subject of the hymn or the feelings of the congregation. But it has become such a burden to me that I cannot help feeling rather indignant, especially as some conversation I had with your leader produced no impression or effect whatsoever. I have this day been desired to officiate at the Holy Communion, but had almost declined it for fear that the common way of playing the organ might again so much disturb my mind that I should become unfit for so solemn a service and be interrupted in my enjoyment by a distracted attention. All at once, the thought struck me, I will send for my dear friend Latrobe and speak with him about it. Perhaps he will not despise the remarks of an old man who indeed understands nothing at all of music and cannot point out the nature of the grievance, but yet thinks that he has a just sense of what is proper and consistent in performing a service in the house of God, which may either contribute to edification or create great disturbance in the minds of the congregation. Perhaps he will feel disposed, if not from a conviction of his mind, yet out of regard to an old friend of his grandfather, father, and himself, to humor him for once, and to play in such a manner as will please him. Now, do you think, my dear brother, that you can bring yourself to admit, for my sake, what you may consider very fine, and condescend to play a simple tune unadorned with so many additional notes and flourishes? And though you should ever not like it yourself, submit, for friendship's sake, to humor my weakness. Yes, I am confident you will, and do pray our Savior that he may give you grace to do it in a manner well-pleasing to him and edifying to his people.
I heard this affectionate address with an impression which convinced me of the truth of his remarks and moved me even to tears. And I promised him that the next time it was my turn to play for him, I would endeavor to gratify him as far as possible, but that it was someone else's turn today.
No, said he, you shall play for me today. It was on that condition that I consented to preside at the communion, and I will send an apology to the proper organist. He added as I was leaving the room, well, my dear brother, if after having acceded to my request this once, you are really of opinion that I have erred in thus endeavoring to make a revolution in the matter of playing the organ, I will say no more, but shall be thankful for your compliance with my wishes on this occasion.
The business was settled, and I took the organ. I prayed the Lord that he would grant me to act herein also as is well-pleasing to him, and was happy to hear afterwards from my highly venerated advisor that he fully approved of the simple and artless manner I had adopted in accompanying the beautiful hymns he had chosen for this solemnity. Little did the venerable bishop suppose that on that occasion he was reading a lecture upon church music, which would produce more real and abiding benefit to his auditor than most of the learned and elaborate dissertations upon counterpoint have ever done. He did, indeed, bring about a reformation, the good effects of which were enjoyed for many years. As for me, I was so fully convinced by the experiment itself of the superior effect of true simplicity in accompanying hymn tunes and suffering the beautiful combinations and transitions with which many of them abound to present themselves in their native grandeur, divested of the harlequin dress by which many organists are apt to cover and disgrace them, that from that day I changed my whole style of playing. Thus, Brother Latrobe. So it appears that the practice of playing extensive interludes between the lines of hymns gradually faded away. It is intriguing just how much interest there remains in this practice, with a great deal of research and discussion devoted to it in various conferences we have attended over the past 15 to 20 years. Only a few later instances of the practice survive, with one even printed in the 1923 Hymnal of the Moravian Church in America. Here is a place where what is probably a very normal urge of the performing musician to doctor simple things was discouraged in order to keep the organist from drawing attention to themselves during worship. Solo vocal music likewise was kept simple and straightforward. The arias, of which there are many, are lovely and in many cases quite well crafted, though short. They do not themselves, however, show off the accomplished technique of the singer. An unfortunate exception occurs, this is my own opinion, in some of the works of Christian Latrobe, who apparently failed to remember all he had learned from Bishop Spangenberg. Some of his solo works sound very much like those of other composers outside the Moravian Church of his day, with somewhat virtuosic displays through long melismas and wide vocal ranges. We should recall in thinking of this that he was living and working in London and a good friend of Franz Joseph Haydn, not working in the relative isolation and security of a settlement congregation.
Once again, Zinzendorf speaks of this true community and fellowship in a hymn.
Christian hearts in love united, seek alone in Jesus rest. Has he not your love excited? Then let love inspire each breast. Members on our head depending, lights reflecting him our Son. Brethren, his commands attending, we in him our Lord are one. Come then, come, O flock of Jesus, covenant with him anew. Unto him who conquered for us, pledge we love and service true. Should the bonds of love which join us lose their strength and prove unreal, drive yourselves in prayer to Jesus till he turns love's bonds to steel. Grant, Lord, that with thy direction, love each other we comply, aiming with unfeigned affection thy love to exemplify. Let our mutual love be glowing, thus the world will plainly see that we as on one stem growing, living branches are indeed. Oh, that such may be our union, as thine with the Father is, and not one of our communion e'er forsake the path of bliss. May our light break forth with brightness, from thy light reflected shine. Thus the world will bear us witness that we, Lord, are truly thine.
You will note that the translation of verse 2 is different from the one you probably already knew by heart. And should our love's union wholly, firmly linked, no more remain, wait ye at his footstool lowly, till he draw it close again. This version, well known and loved among American Moravians, may seem a strong statement of community and fellowship. Verse 2 in the German reads as follows: Kommt, ach, kommt, ihr Gnadenkinder, und erneuert euren Bund. Schwöret unserem Überwinder, lieb und treu aus Herzensgrund. Und wenn eurer Liebeskette Festigkeit und Stärke fehlt, o so fleht die Wette, bis sie Jesus wieder stellt. Our translation of this text, which we just sang, was done for an anthem by Johann Christian Beckler, with the intention of being as absolutely literal as possible and not attempting to rhyme. And we found Zinzendorf's original was stronger yet. There is no room for patient waiting in this verse, no excusing the loss of love among the brethren.
This emphasis of fellowship has received a great deal of attention in the texts selected for Moravian anthems. Johann Christian Beckler set the very stanza quoted above, and that anthem, Come Then Come, O Flock of Jesus, is now receiving a good bit of attention in both this country and in Germany, in Herrnhut as well. Johannes Herp's setting of the text from Romans 14 ties in both the emphasis on the devotion to the Savior and on life in community. The text reads, none among us lives to self, none among us dies to self. If we live unto the Lord. If we die unto the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are the Lord's. And finally, one of the anthems in Brian Henkelmann's Cantata on Zinzendorf text also brings in these two values, devotion to the Savior, community, and fellowship. Again, a Zinzendorf text, the nearer one comes in knowing the Savior, the more enriched, more glad of heart, and more unwavering grows communion with his members. Thus, community and fellowship.